Thank you very much for allowing me this opportunity to share some thoughts on how innovations in public service can help countries to make progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. I will end with some specific suggestions, but the suggestions will be slightly different than perhaps some of the things you've heard on how to harness technology in the public service to support countries in implementation of the SDGs. So I'll just leave you there hanging and waiting to see where I'm going to land. Now, these reflections are informed by a lot of the work that we've been doing in practice, working with countries around the world in understanding what's the challenges, what are the challenges that they are facing when it comes to their efforts in meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. And the recurring theme that happens again and again is how to deal with technological change, with these dramatic changes in technology that we've heard about from Christine, that were also reflected in the results of the survey that was shared this morning. So everyone is basically thinking about what does it mean? What does it mean, this new world in which technologies are changing the way in which our economies work, in which our societies work, the ways in which we interact, communicate with each other. And I think the way in which, simplifying a little bit, the way in which people look at technological change is sort of dual or bipolar. On the one hand, there's fear, anxiety, apprehension about what these new technologies will mean. We heard about artificial intelligence, how advances in artificial intelligence are replicating more and more tasks, activities that we, as human beings, are able to do. And I'll give a concrete example of something that happened with me and with my team. So one of the things that we do when we support countries on the SDGs is do an analysis of the current plans that countries have in place, development plans or a budget if they don't have a development plan, and the SDGs. And try to understand the extent to which these planning budgetary frameworks are aligned with the SDGs. And then we come up with an assessment and say, well, they are 80% aligned, 70% aligned. There are gaps in the SDGs related to the environment. There are gaps related in the SDGs related to industrialization, whatever the case may be. Now, this work has been done by some of my colleagues. Usually, the exercise takes 2 to 3 people and lasts from 3 to 4 weeks. That's the duration of a typical exercise. We've done this in a number of countries. And we threw a challenge to IBM and asked them, would it be possible to automate this process? Because if you think about it, essentially what we're doing is looking at a string of text, which is a development plan, another string of text, which is the SDGs, and with artificial intelligence now able, algorithms that are able to do sentiment analysis, we asked, can we train an algorithm to basically to do the exercise and automate it? So the results, much to the apprehension of my colleagues that were doing this exercise, is that it's possible to automate. And we now have an algorithm that takes 2 to 3 hours to do what used to take 2 to 3 colleagues about 3 to 4 weeks. So my colleagues were not very, very happy about it. Calibrate a little bit this sense of apprehension. What the research seems to indicate is that while it's possible to automate tasks, it's very difficult to rely on artificial intelligence or technologies to completely replace occupation. So my colleagues that used to do this task are still working with me and others. So they didn't lose their jobs. And actually, the fact that this task, which is a little bit repetitive, could be automated, freed up a lot of their time to do other more creative, more rewarding tasks. In fact, there's a study that shows that if you look at the occupations that existed in the United States in 1950 And compared to the occupations that are on the official lists today, there's only one occupation that existed in 1950 and doesn't show up in the list today. That occupation is that of elevator operator. All the other occupations still exist, but the people that do these occupations undertake different tasks, with a lot of other tasks being automated. But still the fear is there. So this is one of the ways in which people are dealing with this challenge, is fear apprehension. On the other extreme, there is clearly a recognition that without major technological breakthroughs, it just will not be possible to achieve some of the SDGs. It will not be feasible, or at least it will not be affordable. I'll just give an example of some technology, major technology advances that have taken place in the field of power generation, and in particular in the case of solar. Today, at least at the project level, solar is the cheapest source of unsubsidized electricity, cheapest than any other source. Now, these advances in technology are the type of breakthroughs that we need to undertake the transition towards much more sustainable patterns of production and consumption that the SDGs speak about. So basically you have this duality of apprehension as well as recognition of the importance of technological change. Now what strikes me about this duality is that it's basically taking technology as sort of an external element that comes from the ether, from somewhere, and to which we are powerless to deal with, and will just determine our future. And here I think it's very important to bear in mind what we have learned in the past, or what we have observed in the past, when our societies confronted technological changes, perhaps technological revolutions, similar to the one that's happening today or that we're confronting today. And the main lesson that we can draw from these periods of rapid technological change of the past, that I think are very relevant for today, is that we are not helpless, that the way in which technological change will affect our economies and societies is shaped by us, by the choices we make, by the policies we implement, by the business decisions we take, by the policy frameworks and institutions that we create. And what we've seen in the past is that it takes innovation, new institutions sometimes, to be created from scratch to enable societies to deal with these technological revolutions. So one example is that in the transition from agriculture to industrial societies, in the long period of the Industrial Revolution, an institution that didn't exist before was created to enable labor, organized labor, to have more power in bargaining with holders of capital. So trade unions were an institution that emerged, that was created in the transition from agriculture to industrial societies. It didn't exist before. And it was an institution that enabled or contributed, it was not the only factor, that enabled the fact that we've had for many years a stable distribution of income between capital and labor. Now, what we're seeing today, though, is that some of these stable relationships appear to be unraveling to some extent. So if I continue with this example of the stable distribution between capital and labor, over the last few years in both developed and developing countries, we see actually a shift away from labor towards capital. Why? Because all of the technologies that we've been talking about, the digital technologies and looking ahead, the technologies of what some people call the fourth industrial revolution, are making investments in capital, in machines, in computers, much cheaper than paying people. So we're seeing a distribution, a shift in the distribution of income away from labor towards capital. Now my point is that this is not something inevitable. It's something that is being driven by the choices, explicitly or implicit, that we make, the policies that we put in place. And here comes my appeal for innovation, and it's appeal for innovation in a way that's very different perhaps than the discussions that we've been having thus far, in that it's appeal for public service, for civil service, to look into how we can empower people, societies to harness technology in a way that enables us to make progress towards the SDGs. So a lot of the discussions that we've been having is how can we use these new technologies to improve service delivery, or the examples that Christine mentioned just now, open huge possibilities. And this is something that's important for us to continue to reflect. But I think civil service has a perhaps deeper responsibility. And this is the appeal I leave before you, which is to think through how does it need to change to enable people to be empowered to harness technology. And I'll give just 3 examples to illustrate. I don't have the answers. And again, going back to the reflections I shared this morning, I don't think there is an answer. I think there are many answers depending on context in different countries. But clearly, one of the things that we're seeing with these new technologies is that they are creating firms that have huge market power, because many of these technologies rely or are characterized by something that economists call network externalities, meaning that the value of a company increases the more people use it, whether it's a social network or a search engine or an electronic merchant. So basically, given these network externalities, where the value increases, the higher the number of people that use it, you have dynamics that are leading to winner takes all. So we have 1 or 2 at most very large companies dominating entire sectors. Now, this very large market power is going against what we consider one basic principle of well-functioning market economies, which is to have competition in the market, entry, enabling other entries to players to come into the market. And it seems also that what the mechanisms that we have in place, that we have put in place to deal with this challenge, antitrust legislation, competition law, are not completely adjusted to the new reality that we have. So this is an area in which we need innovation. I need to finish, right? So I'll just give 2 more examples very, very quickly. I think another area is the way in which civil service interacts with the private sector. So it seems a little bit contradictory with the point I made. But I do believe that for the SDGs to be achieved, governments certainly have a central responsibility, but a lot of the financial resources, the creative resources, technologies are also with the private sector. So how can civil service interact, mechanisms to cooperate with the private sector? I think we need innovations in that front as well. And then finally, and Christine alluded to this as well, personally, I'm convinced that at some point in time, we'll find an equilibrium in which we are able collectively to reach a stage in which we can manage these technologies in a way that is productive and that is inclusive. But it will take time to get there. We learned from the past that sometimes these transitions take a long time. It can be a few years, it can be a few decades. So what do we do in between? Because during these transitions, many people are disrupted. Many people lose their livelihoods, and we're seeing it already happening. So I think civil service has to innovate also in the way in which we think about mechanisms of social protection. Education, Christine mentioned. For instance, should we not put a lot of emphasis in educating people on what are called non-cognitive skills? Not only in technical skills, but also non-cognitive skills. Because we don't know how technology is going to evolve in the future. We cannot predict. We don't know if the skills, very focused training education is going to be relevant a few years from now. But non-cognitive skills, persistence, confidence, those will continue to be relevant no matter what. So shouldn't we strike a balance when it comes to education policies? I'm asking questions, I don't know the answer. But basically the message I want to leave with you is as we think about how we can harness technology to enable us to deliver public services in a much more effective, efficient way, I think civil service also has a responsibility, this higher level responsibility, if you will, to empower people, empower societies to truly harness technology for the achievement of the SDGs. Thank you.